All right, welcome back to Terra Invicta, where it is March 2038. Here is the goal for this episode, where I think we're probably going to push up towards 2040. Our goals are basically threefold. Firstly, this is the episode where I want to develop the technology to produce late-game warships that are capable of traveling anywhere in the solar system and proactively taking the fight to the aliens for the purpose of exotics harvesting. Because we also want to unlock our final objective, which I believe requires a bunch of exotic material. And to get that, we're going to need to be able to go and proactively harvest it from alien locations. While we do that, we're going to need to keep the aliens off balance, because otherwise the snowball getting ahead of our final designs is a problem. So we've got what used to be the Jovian response fleet, fresh from the Battle of Callisto, heading out to one of the alien asteroid bases. The aliens have two primary anchor points in the asteroid belt. If we look at HABs, aliens, they have two locations. 13 Ageria, which is currently producing a bunch of water and volatile material, and their outer base, 250 Bettina, which is currently producing the mining base at least, is producing an insane amount of noble metals and base metals. One of these, well, they both have fleets actually, but they have different fleet numbers. 13 Ageria is the smaller fleet. There's a chance to pinch off about 40 alien vessels, so that's what we're going to slam into. The larger force, at this point, 100 alien warships, roughly. That's a problem. Oh, that's at a different base. Either way, there is an alien base way out here, in the same rough orbital plane as Jupiter. This is 100 alien warships circling around this base. So dealing with this is a lot of exotics, but well beyond our capabilities at this point. So I'm instead going to try and clear the aliens out of the asteroid belt, because once I do that, I can spend fewer resources defending the inner solar system, because we'll have faster ships and it takes longer for the aliens to get there from their new bases, and put more focus on the fight in the outer solar system. One thing I've already noticed is that every time I've destroyed an alien base in the Jovian subsystem, the aliens have responded by rapidly trying to reconstruct more infrastructure further out. Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, all of these areas have got more alien bases going up. They won't deliver the same yields, I don't believe, than the Jupiter mines did, which are now our Jupiter mines, but they should deliver something. So the alien war effort is not exactly going to grind to a halt. It might have a little bit of a let-up, but we're going to need to keep the pressure on. In terms of other things to note, we also want to start boosting the population of Callisto this episode, working towards that 50,000 mark, because if you look at how we're going with the inner solar system at this point, Mars has hit the 50,000 mark, so we'll be getting its hotels and whatnot. Mercury is on its way, but it won't get it because it can't. There's too much radiation there for the final facilities, but the population is climbing. And Luna will hit 50,000 this episode as well. So the inner solar system population goals will be hit. I'll put an update on some of our house rules in the comments, probably in the pin, and we will go from there. So I will come back in just a second when we develop the advanced antimatter plasma core torch, because that's the engine that's going to power our next generation warships. There it is. There's our engine, with a brief view at our expanding empire on Earth in the background, where I've basically been steadily throwing the servants out of multiple areas, unioning up different parts of Africa into the United Arab League, and then just pumping out obscene amounts of boost, just as much boost as I can possibly produce, because we're going to need a lot more where that came from to hit our policy goals. And with all of our technologies and also those administration towers in orbit, our control point cap is just exploding. I could go way higher than 1100. I just don't need to at the moment. I'm also not joining countries together that I could, because I'm getting more boost investment keeping them apart for the moment. But anyway, antimatter plasma core torch, or the advanced version. This is the engine. This is what we wanted. Thrust rating, 18.9. Exhaust velocity rating, 11.5. Propellant hydrogen, which means it can use the DV booster. And each propellant tank is actually really cheap. Like, this is a really cheap engine to run. It's mostly water with a tiny, 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 tiny amount of antimatter, or at least tiny by the standards of what we're about to be producing. We're not going to be able to produce ship designs using that instantly, because the construction cost, let's look at a Titan, for example. It doesn't really matter at this point. I accidentally obsoleted the third engine. That's not what I wanted. The third reactor, rather. All right, so if we put a third-tier antimatter plasma core reactor on this thing, and then we go to the drives and we add the advanced, we won't need these guys. In fact, we probably won't need these guys either. Bingo. All right, 10 propellant tanks on a Titan. We haven't added any mass, but 10 propellant tanks will get you 660 kps. Get that 982 with 10 propellant tanks with that, and then you have to start obviously adding all the mass to the ship, right? But that's excellent performance. The key here is we're going to have something that combines combat acceleration. So we've gone to the point where we have a little bit of DV, like 130 DV. We can get to Jupiter. We can crawl out to these locations slowly, but we are complete bricks when we get there. The antimatter-powered ships let us produce stuff that is going to have some armor, a lot of firepower, a lot of mass, and yet still maneuver, at least in terms of acceleration, not turn rate, accelerate like an escort, and still have the range for much longer distance operations than we did before. The issue, of course, is the antimatter cost. It's not a huge amount of exotics material required to produce these engines. Even if we had 6 thrusters, which I think will be overkill, it's only 0.31 exotics for the propulsion system, which is one advantage antimatter has over the best inertial confinement fusion engines, which we're also researching as a backup. They don't require that many exotics. But we don't have that antimatter supply. We don't have 0.22 antimatter per ship at the moment. So until our super colliders come online, we're not going to be able to design and build our antimatter-powered vessels. That said, at least now we have the core technology, and the super colliders aren't that far off. In fact, through the power of time-lapse, I can have them online now. We've also now got a massive cash deficit because this shit's expensive, but if we ever get desperate, a sale of 1,000 fissile material, so about less than 3 months production, is enough to clear 25,000 cash and float us for around 5 months at this rate. So we need to do something about this, but it's not like the situation is critical. As long as we have resource income, we can technically reappropriate, especially if we're going to take more pressure off the fissile stockpile by switching over to antimatter instead. Although super colliders do eat a lot of fissile materials. This is about 50% of our planned super collider capacity. I want to get antimatter production up to 2 per month, but this is enough at Manhattan Station around Mercury to produce 1.1 per month. Each of these stations is eating 20 metal, 20 noble metal, 10 fissile material. So in total, our antimatter production is going to eat 200 fissiles and 400 nobles per month in order to spit out that 2 antimatter I want. But it's going to be what allows us to build the ships that ultimately go out there, allow us to be proactive and get the resources we need to hit our goals. Super colliders online. And yes, Task Force Mercury is going to have to stay on guard. There's still 31 ships in the force, mostly old boats at this point, but a lot of veterans, a lot of officers giving them a lot of boosts, so we can always rush out more ships if needed. Very important that they keep this station going because the reconstruction time on these things is like a year. If we lose it, it's going to be a full year to build that capacity back up. So we will be spreading it across 2 stations, but yeah, key priority for defense. And so let's talk next generation ship design. Now that we have an engine, we have a reactor, we have weapons, we have armor, we have all the pieces we need to put together. And in about a month, we'll have the antimatter necessary to begin production. So we're going to transition over to a Titan Dreadnought fleet. Why? Because there's a limited number of ships that can be engaged in combat at any given time. And if we're going to have very large fleet-on-fleet engagements, I'd rather the ships that I bring that are present on the screen and not waiting to be reinforcements bring as much combat power per ship as possible, even if they're not resource efficient, hence going for the larger designs. So I've split the fleet up into a couple of core classes, although as you can see, there are a couple of sub-variants with different utility modules, and we'll have a mix in a fleet. The first, because we're Exodus, and what would a billionaire founder do? Name the first of the big ships after himself. So this is the Al-Ashka class. This is a Siege Coiler Titan. So we have a Spinal Siege Coiler Mark II, Targeting Computer Mark III, Heavy Lithium Heat Sink, Hydrogen Trap, a Repair Bay, ECM, an Advanced Laser Engine, a Salvage Bay, and a magazine. And there are all sorts of different versions of this ship. Because it's got this a coil armament, it doesn't need specifically a bunch of utility modules, so it can afford to take some nice-to-haves. So this is a ship that can carry like a fleet bridge. This is a ship that could carry a science module. A lot of different variants we're going to put together. Then we're combining that with 3 phaser point defenses and a 40mm, because the 40mm is still a good response, I think, to alien magnetic weapons, which is one of the few things that's going to pose a threat to this thing with all of its armor, because we have 110 forward adamantane armor, is heavy magnetic slamming straight into it. So 40mm, I think, still worth having. Coil gun battery Mark III, small exotics cost, but a lot of velocity, useful for putting more rounds into the void and also potentially engaging smaller flanking ships alongside the laser vessels. Just give them something to shoot at. So even if the alien vessels flank us, they're dealing with coil rounds and they might spend their laser in Guardian mode on those instead. Armor scheme, as I said, 110 front, 15 back, could actually go heavier. And the idea here is we'll sometimes be burning away from our opponents. So in future blocks of this vessel, I might increase the rear armor significantly, but for the moment it's 15, because we'll be doing most of our maneuvering from outside that 1,000 kilometer bracket, is the theory. We'll sort of jockey, we'll engage at near maximum range, we'll pull back. So we shouldn't be taking anything other than max range laser shots in the rear armor, hopefully. I have added some side armor. It's still only 6 side armor. But that's because this shit is monstrously expensive. That side armor is half the volatiles cost of the entire ship. It's about a third of the noble metals cost. It's 133 noble metals, and it's a huge DV cost. If we strip this down to 1 side armor, we'd increase the delta V from 600 to more than 850. But just as a little bit of a insurance policy against some flanking laser fire, because it will happen, given the amount of investment in the vessel and the amount of oomph the engines now provide, I'm going to go with this. So there we are, an advanced antimatter plasma core torch, superconducting coil battery, lithium spray radiator, which is where a lot of the rest of the noble cost and more of the metal cost is coming from. But it does give us a very low vulnerability radiator that is very light. It's still 8,000 tons out of a 43,000 ton displacement vessel, but it is what it is. So that's the Al-Ashkar, and there are various versions of it. Then, supporting the Al-Ashkars, of course, we have 2 versions of the Exodus. There's the standard version, which is the Exodus Arc, and there's an exotics expensive version, a little blingier, to use more of our exotics allowance, our 10% exotic spend allowance, that uses an ultraviolet phaser cannon. So this thing has the same hydrogen trap, heatsink, targeting computer, has the same armor scheme, has a bit more delta V. It could probably have a little bit less delta V because it's got to keep up with the Alashkas and doesn't benefit from any more, so we could possibly cut that down. But for the moment, it is what it is. And then the system is big ultraviolet phaser cannon. This thing is incredible. It costs 3.6 exotics, but it's incredible. Armor effectiveness at 600 kilometers is 6%. Armor is 1% effective at 200 kilometers. It hits hard and it fires quickly. So it cuts through armor better than the arc laser, and its fire rate is twice as high, which means, practically speaking, the offensive firepower of this vessel is pretty much doubled by bringing the phaser instead of the arc laser. So if we were allowed to spend all of our exotics, if this was Humanity First or Resistance or whatever, I would only be using these phasers, because it just makes sense. If the job of your ship is to shoot things with big laser that shoot twice as quickly, worth the investment. And then we have a whole bunch of laser engines. There's 5 of them on this vessel. So that should give 100 megajoule boost to the main phaser, while also boosting this infrared phaser battery and the 5-point defenses. And because the point defenses are getting that much of a boost, they should be able to engage magnetic rounds and missiles from further away. That's the hope, especially once we get some officer promotions. So those 2 together are the main offensive firepower of the fleet. Then we have a supporting vessel, a fleet defense vessel. So the sequel to the old Disco class is the Buschdorf class, which is a laser engine dreadnought with 8-point defenses and 3 infrared phaser cannons in the nose. Very small exotics cost, same acceleration, same armor scheme, so same protection scheme, same amount of delta V, but this is just dedicated to the fleet defense role. Never have enough point defense. Next supporting vessel, the Dreadnought, the Felice class, named after the officer who survived and was promoted as a result of the first major battle of Mercury, the one who survived the charge. So this is our nuclear weapons carrier. Heavy siege coiler, 3 magazines, 6 tubes, so 60 shaped nuclear weapons on board, point defense laser, autocannon, so mostly reliant on fleet point defense, but still with some self-defend capability, and the 40mm there for magnetics. But it's got a heavy siege coiler to cause demand in the enemy system, while also having the missiles we need to destroy escorts or provide that temporary surge. So bring some nukes along for the fight, I think worth it. Slightly lighter armor scheme for the Dreadnought, but still pretty bloody heavy. 100 forward armor, 6 side armor, 12 rear armor. And those, I think, are our primary classes. We'll also have a Marine cruiser, which can go with the fleets and carry Marines, although I'm also amenable to the idea of having versions of the main Titans that have some Marine modules, specifically the ones that don't need laser engines, but it's something I'll give a think. These are the designs we're going to go with for Wave 1. I'm going to construct the first fleet around Callisto and Io, just because it's a good strategic position in the solar system to raid both out and also back in. So I think it's decent, especially given we already have fleets based in the inner solar system, that we build our first Titan fleet around Jupiter. But ultimately, we'll probably produce multiple Titan fleets and have them operate independently. Those are the designs, that's the technology. Now we just have to let the antimatter roll in, and there's probably going to be like up to a year for these ships to construct in a tier 2 shipyard. I think it's 200 and something days in a level 3. We don't have many level 3 shipyards because they're so power demanding. And it's close to a year in a tier 2. So I'll get the antimatter rolling in and get these things constructed. In the meantime, Task Force Jovian Response, which is no longer in the Jovian system, will be arriving in low orbit around that target asteroid on 27 July 2038. And okay, we're talking to the initiative, but I also think we're about to finish our objective. What do I want from the initiative? Well, I want lots of money because I'm running a deficit. I want their boost, I want their volatiles, and as always, I will hand them technology that I don't really mind them having. So here you are. You can have space traffic control. What else can I give you? Here, have an atom smasher. Do I care about I'll give battery farms. Your counselors can live longer. Life Science Institute, immediate instant training. Wow, you want a lot for this stuff. You know what? I'm just going to give you super colliders because you really care about that. Give me your resources for free. Thank you very much.
Offering support.
And the great journey ahead. There it is. Despite our many technological advances, settling a new branch of humanity in the orbit of a distant star has required a profound step change in our approach to spacecraft design. The speed and size of our first interstellar colony ship have been mere parts of the equation, rather than the end goal in themselves. Because we cannot say exactly what awaits us in Terra, which I assume is the planet we're going for, we've had to devise a vessel that can sustain human life in relative comfort for a generation at least. Some might say that the accomplishment is nothing short of a miracle, but it is nothing of the sort. It is simply the consequence of unbridled human ingenuity and resolve.
Our mission to Terra is ready.
We are. We have completed the Plot the Great Journey objective. The blueprints for our first interstellar vessel have been drawn up, namely Bifrost. It will be the nice reference. It will be the largest vehicle in human history. The Bifrost basic design consists of a large central propulsion and engineering section with a cylindrical outer ring that will hold okay, so that's how you're going to provide the gravity. You're going to spin the ring. Okay, yeah, it says. The ship will spin around its central axis to provide effective gravity to the outer ring. That way people don't suffer severe muscular atrophy and all the terrible stuff that happens if you're in 0G for long periods of time. So that makes sense. We have a 0G engineering section, and we have a populated area of the ship that experiences effective gravity. Propulsion engineering will remain in 0G, and a ablative shield at the ship's rear will be targeted by the HAB's launching lasers to provide an initial burst of acceleration to take it out of the solar system. Okay, so we're going to get a lot of the energy initially, at least for the acceleration phase, from outside the ship, which helps address the rocket equation. We're moving a lot of the propellant off the vessel to give it a boost. From there, the ship main drive will take over, providing a steady acceleration of 0.25 G. Why not 1 G? Speed will peak at 0.97 C, 97% of the speed of light. That is, okay. All right. Counting both acceleration and deceleration, the total travel, I can see why we needed either space magic fusion reactors with exotic materials or antimatter power plants to make that happen. Counting both acceleration and deceleration, the total travel time will be 32 years from an Earth frame of reference. But from the perspective of the passengers, 16 years will pass between their departure and arrival. Okay, this is not really a generation ship. This is, 16 years, kind of like 16 experienced years, kind of an awkward amount. Like there will be a generation born on board, but you're going to be arriving with a lot of the crew who left in the first place. Hopefully all of the crew who left in the first place. So it's not like there'll be, grandchildren and great-grandchildren aboard who don't remember Earth. Interesting. The task for our would-be colonists will be a daunting one. We have only the most minimal knowledge of our destination. There are hundreds of ways in which the mission can fail, and in this context, mission failure means certain death for every man, woman, and child aboard the ship. Given this, one would expect we would have very few volunteers. No, you wouldn't. You're saying, hey, do you want to go to space for it? There are always people who are bold for adventure. They always. And we're going to have a lot of families we owe places because they're the families of the crews on all those militia ships that I have been using in those battles. Yeah, that's how we're going to describe the tactics we've been using. Anyway, the truth is quite the opposite. The Bifrost will be able to carry 4,180 colonists. Well, that's kind of shit. The Bifrost will be able to carry 4,180. Have we done this whole bloody thing for 4,180 colonists? Kind of phoning it in, aren't we? I guess the other 8 billion can sort of, especially before we knew we could win, it's like, yeah, man, we'll risk all of the 8 billion people of Earth for a slight chance that we save 4,180 who are well connected to the billionaire founders. Okay, all right. And we already have more than 10 times that many applicants with more approaching us every day. Humanity's pioneer spirit is very much alive. So now we have to construct the interstellar launching laser module at one of the HABs. To do that, we'll need to research the facility. We'll need either Terra fusion reactors, which we're researching, or antimatter propulsion, which we have, and a bunch of other tech that we already have. The interstellar launch facility costs 11,000 base metal, 6.3 thousand noble metal, 5,000 volatiles, which isn't a problem now but might be, and 400 bloody exotics. So I was right. We're going to need to go say hi to some aliens and retrieve their hull materials because I'm hoping I can build more than one of these things. 4,100 colonists just ain't going to cut it. So I think before we call this quits, no matter what the objective says, if the game lets me, I don't know, I reckon we build at least 3 of the things. Anyway, let me know if you think I'm being unreasonable or not, but I think to maximize our chances of success, I'd want to launch multiple colony vessels. So if the game lets me do it, I'm tempted to target not 400 exotics to build one of these things. We'll try and do that first. But I'm tempted to try and piff a couple of these things out into the void just to maximize our chances of success. But in any case, there we are. We have our objective. We have our design. 400 exotics for every 4,200 people that we want to save, quote unquote. Although in the process of doing that, process of getting all the exotics, we might accidentally save all the people of Earth and the hundreds of thousands that we're going to set up across the solar system. Funny how that works. Let's make it happen. Okay, our exotics gathering expedition, which is our old Poseidon Torch-powered battleships and their marine cruisers, has arrived at their objective. I initiate a marine action against the base on the surface, not because I expect it to complete, although it would be a nice bonus, but instead because I want to bait the alien fleet out from the station so I don't have to fight it with the station at its back. They dutifully do exactly that, and in just a moment, the fight will be on. Now, I'm dubbing this battle after the fact, and it's one of the last ones before I figured out that you could actually adjust your pre-battle formation. So thank you to everyone who tipped me off on that. I figured that out in further battles, but for the moment, we're dealing with an auto-spawn formation for the last time. What you'll see immediately is I form up in a Great Wall formation and then realize just how much less maneuverable these ships are than my previous H. Orion drive ships, or the antimatter vessels that will be coming next. They just don't have much acceleration. So wall versus wall, what we're going to do is drift slightly to the left, just so that we're closer to one part of the alien formation than the other. I generally prefer to do this because it means you don't close range with the entire alien formation at the same time. Just about everything is spawned because I do have a very high battle limit. I bail out one of my marine cruisers early, but then I decide that realistically the rest of the formation really needs them there. They have point defense, but I bail out one with torpedo tubes because I decide it'll be less useful to me than the point defense equipped ones. What we then have almost immediately is the aliens launching all of their flankers. That's what all of those velocity arrows are. And it looks like in this case, they're going for a vertical envelopment. They're going to try and pass for the most part over us, one or two underneath us. So it's going to become a laser targeting fest. The goal here is going to be to make sure that the lancers with the siege coils take shots at what they can, but their main target is going to be the larger ships in that main formation. All of those little escorts, they're there to be engaged by, as you can see me now targeting. They're there for the nose phasers, the nose arc lasers, and of course, some of the missiles that we brought along as well. Siege coils going out into the formation, and hopefully they'll catch lasers. But the main goal is to start picking off these ships that are exposing side armor as they try and move up into those vertical envelopment positions, because this is where the lasers are going to shine. And as you can see, even against heavier vessels, they're not heavy on their sides. They can't be. Even with alien technology and exotic armor, there are limits to how much side armor you can realistically put on things. So even at max range, a ultraviolet phaser with some advanced laser engines behind it is going to punch through relatively reliably, at least if you take enough shots. We are going to spend part of the battle in this view though, because this stage is me in slow motion, making sure I'm being as efficient as possible with my target calls to make sure that while they're closing, the lasers pick off as many as they can. We'll also need to pick the right point to release our missiles, because this task force doesn't have anywhere near the same amount of missiles in stock that we did with some of our previous forces. That said, we've basically knocked out 2 ships at this point. There's the destruction, so I'll retask. I've hotbarred some of my laser ships at this point so I can rapidly change targets and then do some manual work on some of the siege coils. But I'm just making sure that marine ship gets out of the way, and then it's back to the happy game of targeting. I now allocate torpedoes. So with some off-screen clicking, we get ready for the torpedoes to fly. Okay, most of the torpedoes are allocated while the lasers continue to do work. And the main point here is just capacity management. The lasers can destroy these ships really well. What they can't do, in the quantities I have them, is destroy them fast enough. So the missiles exist to try and take out a lot of targets at the same time, so they don't overwhelm us, because if they do, I'm going to have to point my laser ships in different directions, which will expose their side armor to the main enemy fleet. Hopefully they'll be partly distracted by all the siege coils coming their way, but that can't be guaranteed. So if nothing else, I'm hoping these missile dreadnoughts sort of clean the field up a bit. It's not guaranteed, because there's always a chance these small ships will shoot them down, but we'll see what we're able to accomplish. Unfortunately, in this battle, I get greedy. I way undercook the salvo, and I forget for one critical thing. In these flanking groups, it's not just escorts with a single laser, which is what I built the salvos around. It includes some larger vessels, many of which have multiple small laser batteries that are capable of fending off these torpedo salvos. So, as much firepower there is in these missiles, I probably would have been better off committing them against the capital targets, because when the aliens flank with ships that have some PD, as well as just the original gunships, missiles lose some of their value unless you launch larger salvos. Here I undercook it, and I kind of get punished for it, forcing me to fall back on lasers as my critical form of fleet defense. Yeah, those aren't getting through, not with that many lasers. That forces me to fall back on just good target calling with my lasers. Fortunately, a lot of the flankers are either still exposed or they're drifting beyond range and can't really hurt us and thus forced to maneuver, opening them up to laser engagements, or at least careful laser engagements. You'll see ships continue to pop off. The Autumn Storm is about to be scratched, which is a good kill, meaning these flanking groups are slowly being worn out. If we are losing the war to prevent the flankers from, flanking, what we are succeeding in doing is preventing them from doing a whole bunch of damage. You can see that they are making long-range laser shots into side armor, which does hurt, but they're paying for it. And most importantly, the main body of alien capital ships hasn't yet engaged. By the time it engaged, I'm hoping most of the escorts should be gone, and the siege coilers are keeping them busy anyway. I am devoting a couple of siege coils up in random directions in the hope that they grab laser attention, but for the most part, I'm going to be manually targeting the coils onto that main line of capital ships in the hopes of attriting them before they get close enough to do serious harm. And I disengage that marine ship, because why not? By this point, we've kind of de facto fallen into a defensive formation that I'm going to use more later in the campaign, especially once I figure out that I can adjust where ships start. Laser ships are pointed upwards and downwards where necessary in order to target the ships coming over the top or the bottom of our formation, while the coils, hopefully in the center of our formation, provide that core firepower against the enemy capital battle line. and the missile ships and PD ships are also arrayed in the center of formation, providing their support functions. I released the rest of my missiles alongside the siege coils because now that I figured out that the escorts can't really be easily overwhelmed because they took a lot of PD with them, I decide instead to go after the capitals that are being also hit with siege coils, and I have much better results. Instead of destroying 0 escorts, I instantly wipe out multiple capital ships using the missiles from like 1 or 2 ships of my own. That destroys a lot of targets straight away and lets the siege coils focus on a smaller number of targets. I'm also aware that some of my ships have taken a lot of flanking laser fire and are showing lots of signs of damage, but the flanking force from the aliens has really been very heavily attrited by those big nose lasers. And whereas before we had these big swarms of flanking ships, by this point, as you can see, it's more harassing groups, and a lot of what's out there is actually quite heavily damaged, and if it gets close enough to be seriously dangerous, well, the closer they get, the more damage our lasers will do. The most challenging decision I'm having to make so far is how do you balance exposing your laser ships by pivoting them to engage flankers against the payoff of engaging the flankers? And secondly, when I disable one of these escort ships, do I keep firing until it's destroyed? Or do I risk leaving it there with maybe some of its weapons online or maybe some maneuverability and move on to a target that's still fully operational? Like here, I start switching priority targeting to, I think that's the Dawn Cleaver, before the alien escort next to it is destroyed. The reason being, a ship with no maneuvering and seemingly no weapons can't hurt us, whereas one with both can. So it becomes the priority target. We'll clean up the rest of the ship later if need be. Here I start to sort of pivot the formation a little bit to try and curve around the alien battle line such as it is. You can see them off to the right-hand side of the screen at the moment. And the idea is to guarantee we'll get some shots into their side armor, basically no matter how they'll face. So we're going to do that usual drifting motion. I can't do it with the same speed I did in previous battles, like around Mercury, because we just don't have the acceleration that the old Lancers did. We got a lot more range, but we don't have the same combat acceleration. Now, there is one alien escort here, Dark Wind class, that gets behind us. I'm going to quickly clean that up. But you might see an interesting way the formation is evolving at this point. The aliens are trying to essentially curve around one of our flanks, while at the same time I'm trying to pivot part of my formation to get onto their flank too. So we're both risking exposing some of our vessels. We're both doing maneuvering that isn't exactly high speed, but does attempt to put the enemy at a disadvantage. What I am careful to do, where possible, is make sure the laser ships that I'm pivoting around in such a way as to make them vulnerable are the ones that are as far as possible away from the main enemy capitals. It won't save them if they're engaged by lasers, but it should reduce the damage. And at this point, the aliens perform this weird sort of wave pool maneuver. You have the main capital fleet, such as it is, performing a sort of drive-by, focusing on what is, for me, from my perspective, the right-hand side of the screen flank. And then the rest of the alien force burning hard down to try and get underneath us, presumably to go after the exposed armor of some of those laser boats. What it does do, though, is light up all their side armor for those same laser ships to engage, as long as I'm able to pivot them around in time. This essentially means taking some risks. We're going to have to expose side armor to someone, so I decide to ultimately focus on firepower over protection. I start turning all of the Lancers to face the capital ships so they can fire their siege coilers against them, and also have their front armor facing towards them, having just lost one of the ships on our flank because I didn't turn early enough. But at the same time, I keep the laser ships focused forward to take these side armor shots on these potential flankers while they're still exposed. This is where I'm looking forward to antimatter engines, not just because we'll get more acceleration and in these sort of situations we can control the fight so we don't find ourselves in this kind of envelopment scenario, but also because it means I'll be able to bring just a little bit more side armor. Because in this scenario, where if you don't have the acceleration, there is no avoiding side shots, being able to bring 6 armor rather than 1 would give us just that little bit more survivability. That said, siege coils going out, pivoting the ships that I can. I'm also going to turn the PD ships to face them, because that'll bring the forward phases into view and also hopefully present forward armor. And then it's just a hope that the laser boats can destroy those escorts, gunships, and other potential flankers quickly enough. They seem to have decided not to try and get underneath my formation at this point. But in order to make that correcting burn, they're still exposing side armor, so I pick out my targets and keep firing. I love those lasers. especially if we can get more officer promotions on these, directed energy officers and other officers that boost laser output. Those new Titans, especially the ones that get phasers rather than these arc lasers, should do even better at this role. I can imagine them swatting these smaller ships out of the sky. So as long as we maintain that right balance, siege coils and nukes to deal with the capitals, lasers to deal with the smaller ships, we should be able to continue to deal with Hydra forces that are equivalent to or even outnumber us. And critically, unlike the old days, do it without losing a very large number of ships. I am suffering a lot of attrition in this fight, but most of it so far has been the result of an unfortunate but I think necessary decision I made. I decided to keep the Marine ships in the battle line. The reason being that they brought additional point defense. They were still pretty heavily armored, just not as heavily armored as the rest of my vessels, and some of them had offensive weapons as well. So my concern was that if I disengage the Marine ships, the rest of the fleet might be very, very vulnerable. Instead, I decided to keep those Marine cruisers in the battle line, essentially, and they have done an excellent job fending off torpedoes, magnetic rounds, and even contributing missiles against some enemy targets. Unfortunately, as we will see once we start counting the cost, they've paid a much heavier price than the heavier combat units, our dreadnoughts, our lancers, and ships like that. Now, unfortunately for me, there really is no getting out of this situation where I'm having to fight in 3 rough directions at once. I can only shoot my way out of the problem. But you've heard enough about me complaining about these engines. I'm just really looking forward to Antimatter, is basically the long and short of it at this point. So we task my lasers to try and eliminate the last of the flankers as fast as possible, so that hopefully I can pivot the rest of the fleet to face the remaining larger ships. The problem is most of these targets are at fairly extreme range, so the time to kill is fairly long, but as you can see, as long as they don't face their forward armor towards the shooter, I do get good results. I do take some hits and even some losses, as you can see there, from flanking laser hits, particularly the large nose laser cannons of some of the larger flankers. But at this point, I do see an opportunity. The larger alien ships, the battle cruisers, have pretty much drifted out of engagement range for the moment, so I double down with basically everything I have left to try and get side shots wherever possible and finally eliminate these smaller buggers. I've even resorted to drifting out some of the Marine ships to try and cause them to pivot up to try and engage the side armor of them rather than the larger ships, knowing that the moment they do so, I can stick a bunch of arc lasers on them and pretty much instantly blow them out of the sky. They don't tend to take the bait though. Instead, they focus on the side armor of ships in the regular formation. Again, mostly Marine ships because they have the lightest protection. And so I have to do this the hard way, basically brute forcing through their armor, using lasers even when I don't get side shots. I take those where I can, but it is what it is. Never underestimate the power of laser cannons in a flanking position, because there is a reason the aliens do these very dangerous burns to try and get in exactly this position. And if we didn't bring enough lasers, this would be a really, really difficult spot to be in. As it is, it's not great, but we did bring enough lasers to solve it. Unfortunately, as much as I'd love to give my laser captains all the time in the world, we're under some serious time pressure here, because at this point, the alien larger ships return, the battle cruisers have reversed their burn, and now we're taking laser fire, plasma, and magnetics are also incoming. That means readdressing my siege lancers, readdressing the Bushtuffs that have their remaining point defense, and quietly encouraging the captains on the remaining laser boats to please take out those remaining flankers, because we need every gun in the fleet pointed in one direction. Please and thank you. You've noticed I have distanced off some of the Marine cruisers because they were taking damage. I try and readdress them so they'll have front armor facing the correct direction and can potentially contribute, but are far enough away that they're not alien priority targets, and as a result, they're not likely to take as much hideous attrition like the way they have so far. I genuinely wasn't prepared for the extent to which the aliens preferentially targeted the less armoured but less combat valued Marine cruisers rather than the main combat ships. I expected they'd go after the Lancers, the Dreadnoughts, the things that could actually hurt them. Instead, they went for the easy kills, which is those Marine ships. And so this is the last battle I decide during this experience where I bring them into the battle line. That said, if I hadn't, I'm not sure this battle would go the way it had. They've done an enormous amount of work. They've even gotten some kills. And given how closely matched this ended up being in terms of firepower and protection, the extra mass probably helped us. As it stands though, the alien response is valiant to try and bring the battle cruisers back in. But it's not quite enough. The alien flanking force is now basically done, which means I can put my heavy forward armor forward, and whenever the human ships that we've come up with are able to face the aliens head on, we have the edge. Because we believe in putting truly obscene amounts of adamantane, like meters and meters of the stuff on the front of our warships, and siege coils against predictable targets do not mess around. So I readdress some of the Pathfinders with their big lasers to pick off the Great Annihilator while it's exposing its side, and then put the siege coils to work. After a bunch of shooting, the Great Annihilator is basically a burning wreck. Alien plasma isn't doing much against our forward arc, our PD is holding back all the magnetics, and so it's just a matter of time. Siege coils, one after the other, pick up the remaining ships, until only one battlecruiser and one cruiser is left on the field. At that point, it's basically job done. A few more siege coil shots, and it's all over. The last ship standing is the Opal Meteor, which for its trouble gets a consolation prize of being fired at by absolutely everything in our force at maximum speed. I think it's a siege. I'm not sure if it's a siege coil or a laser that ultimately does it. But there you go. Jump into the result screen, you'll see the result is a crushing human victory, but it's not exactly clean. The aliens lose basically their entire force, but we do lose 2 capital ships, including the Pinafore, and most of the Marine fleet. There are a bunch of officer promotions, but also a lot of officer casualties, again, primarily in the Marine ships. I think it is fair to say the battle achieved its main strategic objectives. We gathered a large haul of exotics and traded 9 ships for 41 of theirs. Getting nearly 50 exotics is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. But cracking that fleet hurt. Okay, so at this point, we should have enough ammunition and armor and survivability left to go after the station the aliens have in orbit, although I'm not sure we'll have the capacity to go after the ground location. The siege coilers are running low on ammo. We're probably going to need it to crush the battle stations. And I'm not sure I want to chance the orbital defenses with as many ships damaged as I have. So we may end up pinching off the remaining fleet, which will give us a couple more alien ships destroyed and potentially remove Stoneforge Station. But I have a feeling it's going to take another trip out here, probably with some Marine cruisers to take out the base, which is unfortunate given the amount of water and volatiles it's currently producing. But it is what it is. That is a victory of sorts. We'll wipe out what's left in orbit and go from there. Okay, it is October. After that cleanup, as you can see, Jovian Response was in really rough shape. We didn't lose any additional ships, which is good. Anyway, we have basically the entire fleet intact, but as you can see, there's a lot of damage in the lineup. Some of the siege coiling vessels were really low on ammo. I think 59 is actually fairly high. Yeah, see, 19 rounds remaining on the triplex. Oof. So they had to bail out. They'll get to Mars in November because the Mars base was actually the closest to where they were in terms of flight time. So I've got them burning hard. They'll have 15 Delta V in reserve when they get there and reload. That'll be pretty intensive on our fissiles, but I think supporting one fleet of torch vessels is better than retiring them and waiting to replace them, although the replacements are very much on the way. If we look at Io, you can see that the Dreadnoughts and Titans are in construction, and if we jump over to Callisto, also orders have been placed for a whole bunch of Titans. I'm going to aim for a fleet of about 30 as the first expeditionary force. I'll talk about the potential utilization once we've got the ships assembled, and then we'll want to assemble a second force and consider when it is time to run straight into the Alien Doom fleet versus when we're better off, which I think we will be initially, raiding into the outer areas. To support those operations, we're going to need even more mission control. So I'm building another 83, but this time we've started building mission control around Callisto. Callisto is now home to 5 ground bases, but also its first orbital command post. These are command centers, the tier 2s, 2 mission control per unit. I believe future patches are actually going to fundamentally change how these work. I think op centers and command centers are going to become a 1 per station unit, so there'll be no more of these command stations, I believe. I think that's just a rumor, but it's what I've heard. But for the moment, we're going to exploit the tech as it is and produce a whole bunch of mission control. The reason to put it around Callisto is we're getting to the point now where we have fusion reactors and hopefully soon heavy fusion reactor farms which make it possible to do non-solar powered stuff like this relatively efficiently out this far. And it's a cheap way, relatively speaking, to add a whole bunch of population. 4 command centers, so these blobs here, each of those are 1,000 population. So it saves us boost producing residential modules. If we have to produce MC, we can produce it here anyway. So any population count that I can generate without having to brute force it using residence modules works for me. Meanwhile, back on planet Earth, things are looking pretty good. China is consolidated. Europe is consolidated. Obviously, the servants took the last points in Eurasia, but we then took them back. So I almost appreciate them doing that because it let us do that without breaking any of our non-aggression pacts. We took the servant Pakistan away. We haven't taken the servant point India. That's on the back burner. But we've got Egypt, Sudan, Algeria, Morocco. Took the Gulf states from the servants. I think Algeria was actually the protectorate, not the servants. But either way, we're starting to accumulate all of these countries and just pumping the boost. Just pumping the boost. A country like even Sudan, for example, is increasing the amount of boost. They're scaling it up by almost 2 per year, which isn't bad. As in they're building 2 additional boost capacity per year, which is not bad for a country that costs 14 control points to hold. Very, very cost efficient. So I think that's it for the moment in terms of critical technologies. I'm just racking up a whole bunch of excess stuff at this point, working down the fusion line towards the serious fusion reactors, so terawatt fusion, eventually inertial confinement. So we do eventually have an alternative to antimatter engines, even though we haven't fielded them yet. I'm still preparing for a potential alternative. But mostly I'm just trying to burn out the tech tree, because once we've researched all the regular tech, we can go into future science, probably around 2040. And what I want to do then is get into these future science repeatables, particularly this one, future tech space science. Every time we complete this, the number of mining stations we can maintain without extra mission control cost goes up by 1. So we can scale our space economy and just drown the aliens in resources, which is always a good approach. At the moment, we're paying 32 additional mission control for the mines I have above my cap of 36. And if I add another mine, it would add another 8 mission control cost. And I think the one after that would cost 9, etc. So this is actually a significant mission control saving. Life science is also good, increases the life expectancy of our councillors by 6 months every time we finish it. So as long as we can finish it at least once every 6 months, we should be able to keep our councillors to the end of the game and put them in good shape if any of them want to get on the colony ship. Some of the others have benefits, most of them don't. I don't really care about Mills Tech. So really the ones I want to repeat are life science, space science. And so really, antimatter weapons are basically an afterthought just because they're on the tech tree. We're going to research them. What I really want to do is get to the future tech as quickly as possible. All right, just a quick note. It's November 2038. I just want to call out something that's just happened. The Resistance quietly, while I've been obviously doing a lot, the Resistance has been quietly carrying on their own campaign. In terms of objectives, they have successfully won a battle against an alien ship. They have captured and interrogated a Hydra. So they're now on the research exotics objective, which means they're actually progressing relatively well. It's 2038 and they're progressing their objectives. They're ahead of the others. I think that Humanity First is going to struggle because there are no Hydra on Earth for them to capture. Similar with the Academy and the Initiative, all of them need Hydra on Earth. The Protectorate need to talk to an alien, but there are no aliens on Earth. So I've kind of blocked 4 human factions from progressing. But the Servants and Resistance can still proceed, although we're beating the crap out of the Servants. The Resistance, however, has now started purging Initiative, Servant, and Protectorate bases from Luna. They've destroyed some fleets. And as you can see, they're clearing out Luna real estate. The culprit is Romeo 23, led by this thing. This is a Valkyr Island. This is the Valkyr Island, first ship of its class. And the thing is, while it's not good, it's not terrible. It's not good, but it's not terrible. It's got a Firestar Fission Lantern. So this thing has 45 kps delta V, which means it can successfully transfer from Earth to Luna to Mars if need be. It's got a fair amount of offensive firepower, 7 Artemis torpedo bays, a point defense phaser array, and a 720 centimeter green arc laser cannon, which is nothing to sneeze at. The armor's a bit light, 12 forward, 3 side, 5 rear. I would go down to 1 side armor to put a shit ton more on the front, but you know what? Beggars can't be choosers when it comes to AI ship design. Tin droplet radiator, graphene battery, terawatt gas coefficient 3. This is not terrible. And with that laser, it's also capable of bombarding targets on Earth surface. So the Resistance making stuff happen. They've destroyed a couple of alien vessels, a lot of servant vessels, a lot of infrastructure, and I'm happy to just let them do their thing while we do ours. And while I've launched a number of raiding actions, here we are, I think, at the point to wind up the episode. This is not the entire Titan fleet formed up in the Jovian subsystem, but are the first ships of it. This is Task Force Felice, so far made up of series of Exodus, Al-Ashkar, Bushdorf, and Felice-class capital ships. It'll be much larger than this. We're going to build up, but as those ships launch, we're going to pick our first target. And we have 2 real options here. We're at 360 exotics because of some of the other smaller battles that I've been fighting. I think we have 2, like I said, 2 main options once this task force forms up. Because this is going to be the best of the best. The first option is to deliberately go straight into the alien Doom fleet. The aliens have around this particular asteroid, like we said, on that orbit, more than 100 ships. I think it's at least 104 vessels. Total combat power, about 30,000, including lots of Titans. And we're not talking small stuff here. So we could go into that with maybe a 3-to-1 numerical disadvantage, which means we'd be able to field 1/3 of the amount of ships that you're allowed in battle at any given time, and then we'd have to try and chew through the entire alien force. The advantages, if we win, we basically neutralize the threat to the inner solar system. We can then clean up and then push our way out. And so if we were playing a Humanity First style operation, that might be the option I go with. However, I only need about 40 additional exotics, and we're going to keep building additional Titans. I'm about to put a whole new set into construction, either around Earth or Mars. I'm going to have a look at the shipyards and decide which one's better suited for the problem. So the other option, and like I said, I'll look at the comments probably, is we try and pull apart the alien fleets. Rather than going straight into the Doom fleet, we try and give them something else to worry about. If we look at what they've got in the Saturn subsystem, it's a bunch of smaller fleets. Now, collectively, they add up. But I'm hoping we might be able to jump some of the smaller ones and then potentially smack the orbital stations that build their ships. So like smack Burning Guardian Station, for example, drop Marines on whatever the mining base in that particular location is to slow the economy down a little bit more. This base on Titan, for example, isn't the most productive base they have, but it's a good amount of hundreds and hundreds of water, 750 volatiles, 220 metal, 74 nobles, 4 fissiles. We could drop that, fight a little bit of an engagement, and because we have this 617 KPS coupled with really high acceleration, if it gets too hot at any point, we can evade and bail. I'm going to wait for more ships before I do it, but let's just check. Transfer time to Burning Guardian Station. At max burn, we wouldn't do max burn because we want to keep a lot of Delta V in reserve. Would be 5 weeks if we burn everything. But if we burn a reasonable amount, say 200 or 176, what we could do is we could budget. So we'd say we budget 200 Delta V to get there, 200 Delta V to engage, 200 Delta V to get back. And that would have a turnaround time of less than 6 months from operation initiation, target destruction, all the way back to base, reload, refuel. If we slowed it down, if we were willing to sacrifice an extra 12 weeks, 3 months, we could increase the budget we have for Delta V when we get there. So that's a consideration. So those are our 2 main options. We go for the Death Fleet on Death Fleet battle, or we go for a raiding operation into the Saturn subsystem, which eventually we need to colonize for our house rules. And if we do that, it'll probably push the aliens to push even more of their infrastructure and fleets back out to the Kuiper Belt or around Uranus. And they can still build more sites here. We realistically won't know the materials that are on these sites until either 2045 when probes arrive, or if we get ships out there with science labs. There is a science lab in this Titan fleet. So we'll be able to manually survey if it comes to that. So we could push the aliens a little bit further out, but I'm hoping that we can gather the first exotics we need, get the construction site for the Bifrost, launch our first Bifrost, and then think about launching 2 or 3. I don't know if the game will allow me to do so, but I'm hoping that if I can gather another 400, 800 exotics, I can build another one and launch more than 4,000 humans beyond the solar system. I think that's where we'll leave it. Our first Titans are coming online. Antimatter production is rolling. I'm going to get a second Titan fleet in train. In terms of fusion, we'll get proton-proton fusion in November, which is this is like the top tier type of fusion. That coupled with terawatt fusion eventually lets us push to the absolute best fusion reactors. So we'll have a look at those as they come online. We should also get to future technology because we're just rounding out techs at this point. There's very few things left to research thanks to our chunky science income. And then we'll be able to go into these future techs and start increasing our mine limit and the ages of our councillors. Earth game, same thing. Continue expansion, more boost, more boost, more boost, more boost to hit those colony objectives that we've set ourselves. Hope you're enjoying and you're ready for some Titan fleet engagements next episode.